always think of actors as having breakthrough moments. I called up my agent and said, look, the bank manager's banging on at me. I'm £60 overdrawn. Can you find something that I can pay him off with? He said, leave it with me, John. And he phoned up next day and said, look, London Weekend Television are doing a transcription of an interview with a villain. It's going to be a real tour de force in terms of memory, because it has to be absolutely accurate. And we know exactly what the guy said because it was one of the first times when a tape recorder was used to record evidence. They're going to pay you £110. I said, great, do it. So I had pages and pages of this stuff to learn, you know, and the more I studied this character, the more I realized what a complete and utter shit he was. You know, he was called out. He was employed to murder somebody, and he subcontracted it to a West Indian guy called Heidner, who got caught, and it got led straight back to him. And he was a smart, dapper Italian called Bert Rossi, and he was a vicious little hitman, but you know. Does everything to get out of the whole thing. You know, I mean, no, I mean, what do you know? I'm trying to work out how much you know. Oh, okay, well, you clearly know I'm involved in this, but you've got to understand, I'm just the slightest. I'm just a tiny little part of this. I mean, it's a huge conspiracy. This. I mean, there's. You know, guys in pretty high places, you know. I mean, well, my role is minimal. He was an utter shit, and I played him with all the hatred in my heart. Most times you create a character out of love. It's possible to create them out of hate as well. A casting director went to the theatre, came home from the theatre at half-time. She had a problem. She didn't know how to cast this role. She switched on the television and said, caught 5 minutes of this London Weekend documentary, called my agent the next day and said, I want to meet this young actor. She steered me through it. And finally, when I got the part, she said to me, now look, John, if you do this part as well as I think you will do it, you will probably never have to look for work again. And to a certain extent, not absolutely, but to a certain extent she was right. And as a consequence of doing this, of doing Shogun, which was the second, I think the second most popular mini-series of all time, after Roots. Spielberg had seen it, and of course it was Spielberg seeing it that actually got me Raiders of the Lost Ark.
First read that script, on screen, the character comes seemingly fully formed. Yes. How much of that was in the original script?
Oh, very little, really. The original script, he was a 5'2" skinny little fellow, and I was probably 260, 265 in terms of weight at the time, and in those days I was quite tall as well. I broke my back on a film set about 10 years ago, and I'm shrinking. I've lost about 1.5 inches, 2 inches perhaps, and going round shoulders as well, which is rather annoying. But I think he's formed because I made him like that. The script read like a comic book. You know, there was very little dialogue and a great deal of scene description. But there was enough there to be able to flesh out the character, and I think the Salah in Raiders of the Lost Ark is different slightly from the Salah in Last Crusade. The focus in Last Crusade is the father-son relationship. Salah becomes more of a more comic relief, but he does come with the background that he's acquired in the first one as well. I've been lucky enough to have parts that I could invest a measure of thought and introspection in. I personally love it when I see actors thinking, when I see a character thinking. And I suppose that it's a pretty deliberate intention on my part when I create a character to show you how the person thinks. Of course, you could say all you have to do is show us how he behaves, and we know how he thinks. But we're quibbling, aren't we?
One of the things that I did notice in the new releases of the Blu-ray is how meticulously planned a lot of the Spielberg scenes were.
And more than that, and did you notice how Harrison himself really knows exactly what he wants? He has got that iconic character really sort of penciled in to the last detail. I mean, it's a tour de force by an actor creating what is going to become a cinematic icon. I think I'm astonished by it. There's a lot of material in this Blu-ray that I hadn't seen before, and that's one of the striking things that comes over to me is how deliberate Harrison's creation is. And it is, the sense of Lucas and Spielberg and Harrison themselves actually creating this memorable picture it's astonishing to behold.
Many years later, you've now become part of another great franchise, which is it is still going. The Lord of the Rings films are a classic, and in that period in between, is making a big blockbuster film like that. How has that changed as an actor, from your point of view, given that so much of it is probably now digital compared to what it was when Raiders of the Lost Ark came out?
As an actor, if you get one great part in a lifetime, you're probably lucky. I mean, the average member of Screen Actors Guild earns, $1,700 a year? To have done I, Claudius, to have done The Naked Civil Servant, to have done Victor Victoria, to have done Shogun, to have done a Bond film, to say nothing of something like Lord of the Rings. I mean, how lucky do you have to be? I used to attribute this to my genius, and then I realized that if you're tall, fat, and ugly, you're in a seller's market, and that's the truth of it all. The great films, to begin with, the great opportunities that come along, you have to be able to recognize them. And they don't come along very often. If they come along once a decade, you are awfully lucky as an actor. The trick is to survive, and the trick of surviving, I think, is to try and make the work that you're doing as good as you can. You see, for most people, you reach 65 and they give you a gold watch and a pension, and they thank you. You've risen in a structure to the point at which you may or may not be able to exceed or excel. There is no career structure for an actor. There is no cut-off point for an actor. One day the phone will stop ringing and no one will want to employ John Rhys-Davies again. Now that may have already happened. Actually not quite, because I know the next 3 things that I'm going to be doing. Possibly the next 5 things I'm going to do. But the point I'm making is, one day the phone will stop ringing and I won't know. Maybe there'll be a period beforehand where the phone doesn't ring quite so often and those periods get longer and longer. But I will never know that the last job I had is the last job of all time.
Mm.
How do you cope with that? How do you cope with that uncertainty? Well, my theory is the only way to deal with it is to assume that this job that I'm doing now is the last job.
Mm.
So I'm going to do it as best I can. It may be a crap film. It may have poor dialogue, poor characterization, an indifferent director, and hopeless actors in it. But my job is to turn the sow's ear into a silk purse to the best I can. Obviously, you can't completely do that. But what you can do is do the best you can.
Mm.
And if you do that and you behave as well as you can, you're not an utter arsehole all the time. You're kind to people, you're generous to people. Then at least you will have gone out with a bit of a bang rather than a, God, thank God that miserable old bugger's dead. That's the theory anyway.
Well, you've just alluded to it, having played so many great roles, being offered so many great roles, from everything from a James Bond villain to, as you said, Lord of the Rings, Indiana Jones. Is there anything that you have always wanted to play and have never been offered the opportunity?
Historically, there are some marvellous parts, and in literary terms, there are some wonderful parts. I mean, Anthony Burgess wrote a book called Earthly Powers. There's a great character of a man who finally becomes Pope in there. I'd love to have had a crack at that. I've been reading Herodotus again, with more application than I did the first time round, let me tell you. And I've come across this wonderful character of Solon, Solon the lawgiver. He was a smart guy, and the Athenians knew it, and they said, draw us up a constitution. And he said, fine, I will do that. But here's the thing. When I have drawn it up, everyone must agree that no matter what, nothing will be changed for 10 years. And I will go away. You cannot have a constitution and a man around with so much power and influence. I will leave. I will go into exile. And his adventures were extraordinary in their own right, and to the best of my knowledge, not much is known of him. I thought that it was Sophocles who originally said, "Till he be dead, call no man happy." But in fact, it was Solon. And he said it, I think, to King Midas. Midas, whose wealth was absolutely legendary. Have I got this right? Is it Midas or Croesus? Come on, you smart guys will correct me. And I think it's Midas who says to him, now, can you imagine, have you ever met any man who could possibly be as happy as I am? And Solon's actual remarks were, till he be dead, call no man happy. In other words, until the game is completely finished, don't think that you can make a pronouncement about the value of your life, or the lack of significance of your life, I suppose, if you look at it in another way. So, yes, that's a silly little segue, isn't it? But yes, there are hundreds of characters I'd love to play. I would like another 5 or 6 lifetimes in order to be able to learn my craft, or at least to polish my craft to the point at which I can, without being dead, call myself happy. But in truth, I suppose, if it all ended tomorrow, I would be very easy about it, you know. If it ends, it ends, and when it ends, I've had a blast. I've done all the things that men should do. I've chased some beautiful women, and caught a few of them. I've raced cars, I've flown airplanes, I've survived being really shot at, really come under mortar fire. I survived car crashes, a plane crash. I have loved and I have been loved. And I have a little daughter now who is the love of my life. So I've also read some good books and listened to great music. And I've travelled a bit too.
Well, I think that's all we've got time for today. But thank you. I need another 5 or 6 lifetimes, I think, to continue this conversation. But
Would you kind?
thank you so much for your time today.